Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a very special end of year edition of Served. I'm joined by three very special guests today. But if you're listening right now, it is 2026. You're in the food service or wider facilities space, and you're probably doing that familiar combination of trying to process what has just happened in 2025 and also trying to figure out what comes next. And the good news is you are in the right place. Today, we're joined by three leaders who have had a front row seat to watch how contract catering has shifted over the last year, and I think have a pretty good idea of where it is headed next. In this episode, we'll break down what actually defined 2025, what were the moves, what were the pressures, what were the surprises, and then, of course, we'll get into the useful part, what to expect in 2026, what's real versus what's hype, what you should be doing now if you want to get ahead. But before we get started, I will introduce you to our guest today. First up, we have our very own Peter Beck, who is co-founder and CEO of Campler and your usual host of Served. Peter was named in the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for this year, as well as recently being recognized as EY's Entrepreneur of the Year. Under his leadership, Campler now supports digital hospitality experiences across over 4,500 locations in 15 different countries, with over 500,000 users on the platform, giving Peter a pretty unique perspective into how the space is evolving. Thanks for being here, Peter. Next up, we have Simon Elliott. Simon is co-founder and managing partner at 4XI Consulting and one of the most recognized global voices in food, facilities, and workplace experience. Simon has led and advised large-scale complex portfolios and is a fellow of the Institute of Directors, as well as a member of the WorkTech Global Advisory Board, bringing a rare blend of strategic and operator-level insight. Thank you also to you, Simon. And last, but certainly not least, we have Chris Stern, who is one of the most established independent catering specialists in the industry. Chris has advised major organizations, including Cisco, Microsoft, BNP Paribas, and more. He's also served as a sector commentator, lecturer, and awards judge, and a trusted, straight-talking advisor for operators and clients alike. Thank you for joining us again, Chris. Now, let's ground ourselves in the year that has just been. And we're going to start off with our first theme, which is what has defined 2025. When you reflect on the year, what stands out as a defining shift for the sector? What potentially moved faster or more aggressively than you'd imagined? And what did we collectively underestimate as a sector together? And we will go first in this instance to you, Simon.
Thanks, Toby, for the introduction. Interesting question. So what defined 2025? Well, as I think about it, I would say ambiguity. And the ambiguity of many moving parts, notwithstanding the rise of artificial intelligence that, of course, we can't ignore. And I think that also defines some of the opportunity for 2026 about how we truly embrace AI and understand how it can benefit and bring contribution to our business, from insights that it can drive, from analyzing the data to give you roadmaps for things that potentially that you should or could do into the future. I think, it's hard to look at 2025 or predict 2026 without mentioning AI.
And interested, Chris, to get your insights there. Do you think AI was the most defining factor of 2025, or do you think it might have been something else?
Guess what I was going to say, AI. So as you've already said that, I think there's one or two other things that we've seen. I mean, absolutely AI and tech generally, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that during the course of this podcast. I think the other thing that we've seen, certainly in the UK, which is really mainly where we operate, is being the consolidation of recent merger and acquisition activity here in the UK, particularly Compass and WSH, who have bought up a lot of the smaller players. And it's still very much work in progress from what I can see. But over this last year, it's become clearer. So we've had, if you look at WSH, you've got Genuine Dining, BM, Baxter Story, Hugo, Most, all of those. Where do they sit in the market? How do they play with each other? Compass Group, even more confusing because you've got the whole CH&Co piece, and then you've got the historic Compass, your restaurant associates. And that's been shaking out, but suddenly we're going to have another big shake-up because of a couple of movements at the top of Compass Group recently, notably Alistair Richards having departed, heading up really the CH&Co business. So it seems to me, there's been a lot going on over the past year. I think it's going to be fascinating to see over the coming year what happens. And that in turn has opened the door to some of the independents. Not that there are that many left. And we've found that market very interesting. The one to watch at the moment is probably Thomas Franks, here in the UK. But there are others as well, Bennett Hay, a couple of new players, Thomas and Tate, who are doing very well. So it's, as ever, it's an exciting market.
Absolutely. And then I think Peter Beck maybe bringing together some of those perspectives, obviously a keen participant in the growth of AI, but equally exposed to some of how these high level acquisitions and mergers are impacting both tech strategy and the wider sector. What was your kind of defining moment of 2025?
Yeah, I think a lot have happened in this industry the last year. Actually, I think AI is definitely a key theme. I think this is the year where caterers, for the first time, really dip their toes into AI from different angles. I think there's a lot more to come there. I think a few other things that stands out for me is also that um, this was kind of like finally the year where we stopped referring back to COVID. We kind of fully out of it now, and now it's kind of the new era to some degree. I think some of the things that have maybe surprised me a little bit in this new era is that I feel that in my discussions with caterers, sustainability feels less now than it's maybe done in the past, which I think is curious on that development. And then I think also the new era for me is also really defined by transparency and partnership. I feel like there's a growth of caterers and companies being even more transparent with each other and partnering that. And then I also really echo that these mergers and acquisitions, both in the UK, but also with Vermaat in the Netherlands, with Foodservice in the Nordics, etc., that the bigger players are getting better, getting bigger, and which dynamics that creates for the industry is definitely an interesting one to follow. So yeah, an interesting year, but I think AI is also, if I should put one word on it, my keyword.
And I think maybe having an interesting perspective from Chris and Simon there, to Peter's point, do you see sustainability slipping down the agenda from both an operator and particularly from a client perspective? What's your take on that?
No, it's fundamental. I think perhaps what's changed is we've just got used to it now. It's become a core part of what everyone does, and every client now, there is a simple expectation. Sustainability and the whole ESG agenda is baked in now to everything we all do. And if anything, it's accelerating even further. We're getting clients who will only work with people who are really strong on that. So no, it's not going away. I think it's here for good.
Your thoughts to that one, Simon?
Yeah, I think my perspective on that is that I think Chris is right that it's not going away anytime soon. And I think that's largely driven by the consumers themselves, right? Because as the university students go into the workforce, that sustainability becomes more and more important. However, from a US lens, the shine has been somewhat taken off the focus on sustainability and ESG for reasons that we read in the newspapers. But it's there for good for sure, and it's crucially important, of course, right? That we take our responsibility seriously. But another observation that I have is that um, I question and wonder if there's sufficient resources put against sustainability to actually make real and sustainable and long-term impact.
Interesting. And I think a lot of what will be defined in some of the conversations that I'm sure you guys are involved with between a client and an operator is really their ability to deliver on what they're saying. I can imagine a lot of caterers are coming into discussions or tender presentations saying, "Hey, we have great people, we have amazing food, and we're very sustainable." And actually, their ability to deliver on those promises in an increasing age where we can measure results right on that front is going to be very interesting to watch. But moving on, maybe if I may, to our second theme, because of the people that we've got with us today, it would be wrong not to talk about technology. So really, how do you guys see the digital landscape changing over the last year? What technology had the biggest impact? And what was potentially not the success that you thought it would be this time last year? Maybe going first to Peter on this one.
we have in the world generally for now a couple of years talked about data being a really, really valuable asset. I think one of the blockers for the contract catering industry in really data utilization has been how many different system that data was, and also the complexity of the data on a contract. Like just in one location, you have multiple different sales channels, you have recipe systems with multiple different suppliers, you have allergens, you have feedback data, you have gross margin goals, you have CO2 goals, etc. There's so much data that I think it has in many ways been overwhelming for caterers to really deal with. And I think 2025 is the year where the technologies was kind of entered that makes data analysis and understanding large portions of data significantly easier. So I think the data is really also now, when I go in and talk with C-level of caterers, data is on top of the agenda in a way that it wasn't a few years ago. So I think that's really a big switch for me. And of course, AI has been a big enabler there. The only thing we're seeing very, very like the beginning of what that technology has to offer long term. But yeah, I think data and AI are kind of the two keywords on the change that I feel like we have seen over the last year. And I think that trend will continue over the upcoming years.
And Simon, to get your perspective on technology and the biggest impacts.
So I think Peter's comment about caterers being overwhelmed is interesting, because I think at the same time, the consumers have also been overwhelmed. And I believe there's an opportunity that, and it's already started to happen. And you, Toby, you mentioned about the surprise for me is that it hasn't been adopted as quickly as I thought it would once be. But the whole principle about employee and workplace apps, we all have seen the history of apps in the workplace, a myriad of apps doing a myriad of different things. But to avoid the employee or the consumer becoming overwhelmed, one app to rule them all, in the words of Lord of the Rings, that they can organize their transportation, their booking, their meeting people at work, their food, their whole work day from home to workplace and all the way back again, through one app to rule them all.
And actually, maybe just to go back to you on that one, Peter, before we go to Chris, do you think it's a single app strategy, or do you think best in breed is kind of here to stay?
I think it also comes down to which lens do you look at it from, because it's not realistic that I in my daily life is just going to have one app. Like I use maybe 20 different apps related to the company on my phone, anything from Slack to communication to maybe Google Meet for video calling, Linear for uh, issue tracking on our system. Like there is so many apps that we use as an employee. So I don't think it's necessarily about one, but I think it is about really being intentional around how many systems and what function does each system fulfill. So I think there will be a lowering in the number of system and number of apps people use, and where different workplaces, of course, need to figure out what is their strategy, where do they make the lines on what is a new app and what is not. Because of course, it's also not sustainable that every time you onboard a new employee, you need to get them into 10 or 20 different apps. So I think that is definitely a consolidation that will happen there, and where it's going to be interesting. And I also think companies will have different strategies to that. Some will care more about that than others. And some also have the global kind of footprint that they operate with to think in, where the complexity just exponentially increases. So it is just a really, really interesting challenge for companies, where I think it's also about how much do you actually want to invest into solving that issue. But I see some of the similar trends for sure, and I'm also very happy and curious about how can we play more into those trends as Canplan.
So, Chris, we've heard about customer experience, particularly on the app front. We've heard a little bit about data on the caterer level. What defines 2025 for you from a technology perspective, and what do you think had the biggest impact?
Well, it's interesting because I'm less app interested, because I don't think things have changed that much in terms of apps. I know behind the scenes now. I think from customer perspective, AI tools have landed well and truly. So they're seeing that. And I'm not seeing people overwhelmed by it. I see people embracing that. I'm surprised, actually, how quickly people have embraced that. The stuff behind the scenes, worries me a little bit. And I think, Peter mentioned about the volume of data, which is great because everyone wants it. But in fact, I know the guys at Campbell are thinking about it, is who is going to enter the data and then who's going to do something with it when it pops out the other end. And I know you're going to be starting to use AI for this, which you really need to, because it's fabulous to have it all there. But the reality is, we get down to basics. The catering team, they're getting the lunch in, right? They're cooking the food and getting the lunch in. And they haven't got the time. And a lot of them don't have the inclination to do stuff with data. So I think we're going to have to be clever. And I think it's begun. I was quite impressed the other day. I was somewhere and the caterer was using a system that was talking to the little tiny screens by the food that would automatically change the price and put the allergen information. And it all just happened automatically. And that's what I'm feeling, that we're seeing the beginning of that in 2025. And I have no doubt that by this time next year, we'll be saying, well, that's what's just there now. That's how it is. But we somehow need to be using that data. And so we're always super interested in wastage. And again, I know the data is there. Caterers have got better at doing the physical stuff they've got to do to measure it. But again, getting that data in a user-friendly form that out the other end is something that's I'm seeing the beginnings of. It's moved on a lot this last year, but there's still work to be done.
I think we've kind of gone from having the data to having the dashboards now, with the ability to kind of have insights coming out the other end. I think one of the things that we're seeing that's quite interesting is this, what we're dubbing a bit the data race, particularly the larger caterers, kind of racing towards a point where they have clean data, they understand where everything is, they can correctly apply the tools and the new capabilities that we have with the age of AI to get these insights out. What I'd be interested in is, it's obviously much easier in some respects for the large caterers to compete on that front. Do you see that smaller caterers have a disadvantage or potentially playing a different game when it comes to technology?
I think the very small ones, yes, they struggle. They haven't necessarily got it. But the large ones obviously have everything. And I think sometimes they go too far with it. Quite often they go too far with it. But everyone's using it. We don't have to tell Peter that. Even the small and medium, in fact, the medium-sized ones, I would suggest, are embracing the latest technology more quickly. The likes of Compass, for example, if you take their Time to Eat app, they're kind of developing their own systems, which is great. And I'm sure it'll work very well for them, but that takes time. Whereas I think the smaller ones can buy into something that's much more dynamic and much more now, and they can do it now. So I don't see them particularly struggling with that.
Peter Beck, maybe build versus buy coming up there. What's your take on that one?
Oh, it's always an interesting one, especially, of course, when you get to a certain size. But I think just the reality is that what we see is it's really, really hard to be feature-wise unique. It's not the fact that you have a feedback functionality or you have a XYZ functionality, because any functionality that somebody comes to us with, we would very likely be able to ship in a quarter or similar. So it's a lot more about how do you deploy it. And then I think if you don't invest, multiple million of pounds and so on annually into development, you will never be able to follow the trends. And I think the reality is, for vast majority of people, it will end up either being significantly worse than what's on the market or significantly more expensive. But I think when it comes to technology, I think where some people maybe sometimes think it a little bit wrongly from my perspective is that I think it's fine to have a piece of technology, a vendor that you use or similar, and say, hey, we use them, and then kind of thinking that, okay, now I've done what I need to do. I'm technical savvy now. I'm up to date. But I think in reality, it's a lot about how do you make concepts around it? How do you use it? How do you do so? Every Friday, the dish of the day is something that the guest in the building can vote on what's going to be on. How do I get the feedback? How do I then improve it? How do I make the loyalty schemes that actually impact the people's life? How do I use nutritional tracking as a differentiator from experience? So I think there's so much more than just saying I have a AI till, I have an app, I have signage and these things, about how do you actually build a concept and an experience around it, where I still see that there is some that is really progressive and really great at that, but there's also others that are still maybe too understand what the impact of technology can be on the experience and also the sales of the caterers. And I think that is also a trend that I will expect to continue into 2026, an increased focus on that.
So buy or build technology, I think, is a very interesting question and been an age-old question that we've asked ourselves. I got some observations on that. Why would a top-tier technology company do their own food service? And therefore, why would the food service companies try and build their technology, right? Because there's a graveyard out there of failed technologies that have been attempted to be developed by contract caterers and food service organizations. And there's an old saying that if you're going to build something yourself rather than buy it, it'll cost you twice as much, take it twice as long, and do half the things that you want it to do.
On that note, and thinking about people who've succeeded and maybe people that haven't in 2025, we'll move on to our third topic. I'd like to understand, starting maybe with you again, Simon, there, what patterns did you see among caterers that really succeeded and progressed in 2025? And maybe what patterns did you see among those who struggled this year?
So I'm going to answer that in potentially a bit of a strange way, in as much that I think there's a root cause issue here, and that is corporate real estate and office occupancy and return to office. I think that those organizations that have become more nimble to be able to provide smaller food and beverage and entertainment spaces closer to the populations, and especially as I think about multi-tenant buildings. If you look at corporate real estate around the world, whichever city you go to, is it 30% occupied, maybe 60% occupied, if you're lucky? So there's a lot of latency out there. So the building owners and real estate folks, they need to get more bums on seats. And one way to do it is to create an entertainment experience for folks to give them a good reason to be in the office. And whichever RTO sort of strategy of mandating back to work 3 days a week, 5 days a week, come back to the office when you want, because there's that range out there. I think those food service organizations who can, and it's not just about providing food and beverage, but it's providing an experience for community, for gathering, for connections, to really activate those spaces and make it a good excuse and good reason for folks to come into the office. Final point is that, look, if you're going to build a spreadsheet, you may as well just do that at home. You don't need to commute and go to an office to do that, right? So the nature of offices is changing to be more community, collaborative, getting together, connections. And I think that the food and contract catering industry has a really important role to play there in that, and a valuable role for building owners and real estate organizations.
Absolutely. And Chris, maybe over to you. Who succeeded in 2025 and why was it? And to Simon's point, maybe who succeeded in getting people back to the office?
It's really interesting. And, I'm not even going to talk about tech, although I will say, tech underpins everything. What we have seen, and I was in the second half of this year, I have been delighted to see some phenomenal spends in staff dining. Kind of double what people were spending. If you take it on a spend per capita basis, I am seeing spend per capita, and this is total number of people on site, over £5 per person per day. That was unheard of before the pandemic. You were looking at £2 or £3. I'm sure you could say euros or dollars would be very similar. So, and how have they done that? They've done that by doing great food and beverage. They reflected the high street. It's cheaper than the high street. It's still not cheap, but it's cheaper than the high street, because as the high street has got more and more expensive, food at work has looked better and better value. But not only that, caterers have got much better at replicating or even doing better than what you get in the high street. So I think it's really quite exciting that our sector, it feels to me that the really strong players in our sector are delivering something customers clearly want and clearly value. And that all feeds back into Simon's point, which is the workplace experience, which is a feature which I'm sure we're going to talk about, or I certainly will be, in terms of what clients are interested in now. we're just about to write a strategy for a big financial services company, and it's all about workplace experience, and beyond that, even it's also about doing good, engaging with the external market, engaging with social enterprises, all of those things. So, and you know what? Tech underpins all of that, because that's all part of the experience, is making it easy for people to spend their money. It makes it, you can communicate with them, you can attract them, and once they get there, you can extract a lot of money from them. It's a really nice story we're seeing, particularly in London, I would say.
It's great to see the market coming back. And Peter, just to get your perspective, what kind of choices or mindsets do you think separated the front runners in this year?
Yeah, I think I actually very, very much agree with both Chris and Simon here. I think the front runners, the one that succeeded, are the ones that actually tailor make or tailor their service based on the workplace strategy of the client. So they actually go in, they understand what is the goal of the client, what do they want with the food? Are they hybrid? Are they in office? Are they remote? Is it for gatherings? Like, what is really the purpose of what we're trying to do here? So you don't just provide food, but you become the solution to some of the key challenges around culture, around engagement, around getting people into work, etc., that the clients might have. And I also see this change. And if you go back 5 years or so on, I feel like there was kind of like a stigma around the industry where somebody was talking about, as the caterer, they do very, very great food the first couple of weeks, then a little bit worse, and then forward when the tender is out again, start to really do amazing food again. And I think that is really also starting to change in my head. I think it's a lot more about the constant relationship of really delivering on the client's strategy. I think it also comes down to what, as you said, Chris, that they are spending more. I think it is quite interesting that, for instance, hospitality spend has increased more than 30% since the pandemic. But in addition to that, like, despite there is objectively fewer people in the office than 6 years ago, but the total spend in our industry is still higher. And that is because more clients are investing into this. And I think the ones that really come with a solution, not just say we can do food, but actually come and say, hey, we can help you with your challenges. I think that are, from my perspective, some of the ones that really succeeded in the last year, and are also going to continue to succeed in the future.
And can I just add a couple of points on that, Toby, because I agree with Peter and Chris, and going back to a couple of points that I made, is that I believe that food service has become more important and more elevated, especially in the business and industry space over the years. I remember when I started my career that a lot of decision makers were in human resources. And then I went through a phase where it was a facilities management team who were making decisions. And we're seeing more and more now that there are actually chief workplace officers or workplace groups that are more strategic and more aligned with the organizations. I think it's a change and shift and focus of how important corporate real estate is, how important their employees are, how important it is to get employees back to the office, right? Whether you use a mandate or not. And I think that the food and the entertainment piece of that plays a very important and now elevated role in that strategic process of getting folks back to work and spending more money, to Chris's point, right? Maybe another indication is that they're spending more money as well.
I think that also in my head raises a question about, like, have you seen any, and that's a little bit outside of my scope because I don't see the FM side that much, but like, what do you see in terms of, like, do you see more single service food kind of as a thing, or do you see that people want full solutions for their workplace that includes maybe cleaning, reception service, other things? Like, how have you seen the workplace providers as a whole change? Is there any tendencies that you have seen in that space?
So in terms of that, it's another interesting age-old question. And we did a piece of research work a couple of years ago now about an organization trying to consider whether they go full FM or separate food services. And the conclusion that we came to is that we couldn't find a truly although it makes logic sense to bundle services together, we couldn't find any reference point to one company that has successfully married food service with janitorial, with facilities management. Many have had a go at it, but nobody has truly succeeded at that. So I think it's about separation, and our perspective is that there's a disparate number of service providers providing a disparate number of actual services. But food and janitorial, they just never have successfully gone together.
They don't. I think you can have an FM company overseeing the whole thing, but what the most successful ones that we see are when the FM company sits over the top of it all, and then they subcontract. What the FM companies, not all of them are great at understanding how to manage their subcontractor, their catering subcontractor, which is fine because then they can come and use us, which is lovely. I'm very pleased when they do, if they recognize that they don't know what they're doing. And the sensible ones know that, right? We should all know what we don't know and not be afraid to ask. And yeah, we work with some FM companies who are great at that and add a significant amount of value to them.
It's an interesting Friday night conversation in the food service sector down at the pub where you say, hey, big company A, they do amazing engineering facilities, but the food's not great. And big company B, the food's excellent, but their reception services maybe not so good, or the cleaning. So definitely resonates. Just on a final point before we start to look at next year, I'd really like to know if there's one thing that operators or caterers should stop doing that they've been doing perhaps too much in 2025. What do you guys think that should be?
I'm happy to take it. They should stop doing what they've been doing ever since I started, which is hiding stuff. So I'd rather talk about what they should do rather than what they shouldn't do. They should be transparent. They should be open. They talk about partnership. And it just doesn't happen because they won't reveal the truth about what they're doing, particularly financially. So I shouldn't encourage them to do this because we get a lot of business going in and helping clients understand what's really happening. And it just astonishes me that caterers still try and pull the wool over clients' eye. Well, perhaps it doesn't astonish me because not enough clients use the likes of us who come and reveal it, so they, caterers can make more money than perhaps a contract is worth. That isn't to say, by the way, caterers should earn a decent income, and that honesty. I think this last year I have seen a glimmer of caterers actually not being afraid to say, do you know what? We need to earn 10, 12, 15% out of this contract instead of being too scared. So yeah, we'll do it for 3%, which no one can run their business on that. And I've been delighted to work with some of the bigger caterers who say, well, look, are we going to get the job if I ask for 10%? I say, yes, because as long as we're convinced it's everything. It just worries me that it's not always everything because they're so bound up in hiding stuff, which they've had to do because of the number of clients that's pushed them into a corner of running a contract at 3%. Maybe our own market's done, the market makes itself, doesn't it? Other caterers go and say, yeah, we'll do it for 3%. So everyone has to do it and everyone has to hide their income until we come along, and we'll never reveal all of it, but we have a pretty good go at it. I mean, I find it quite good fun doing it, but it would be better if the market just moved on, really. Then we talk about something a bit more interesting, like how do you drive sales? How do you actually control costs? You need to see them so you can control them, right? So how do you actually do all of those things rather than all this navel gazing about, how much you're earning and how much is a pint of milk? It's such a waste of time.
And I think that's spot on, Chris. And it's interesting though, because the longer standing, older organizations out there, their business models are based upon that, right? But therefore, it becomes an opportunity for some of these newer organizations to take that stand and take, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work and a right to earn, right? And my point of view is on that. If you take that approach and stance, and you get the buy-in from the clients, they're happy for you to be in a profitable position and transparent at the same time. So it kind of works for everyone.
And they've got better at explaining that to clients. I've been really impressed. I'll shout out for WSH, actually. They've been very strong from a senior level. Not everywhere, I'm sure, but when we've been involved, they've been great.
I think the reality is that the majority, caterers and food service companies, of course, sell to all different kind of companies, anything from manufacturing to tech companies and so on, financial services, etc. And I think the reality is that the caterers have generally a significantly lower profit margin than the majority of the companies they sell to. So I think if you are a financial service company or a tech company or similar, if you look at the margins that these companies operate at, like if you look at the big four Compass, they have from lowest between about 6.5% and to the highest about 10% profit margin as a business. I think that is something that they can understand. Of course, they need to earn some money doing what they do. So I think it is a lot more about how do you then use that to actually focus on, go a little bit away from the cost and saying, if you want this food of a higher quality, it costs more money than if it's a lower quality. And instead focus on, okay, what is it actually that we want to drive for you? What is actually your strategy with this? And who are the right people to fulfill that strategy from your perspective? So about that long-term relationship instead of a very, like, it's not a transactional business to do the food in your workplace. Like, it's not where you do a sell and then it's gone. Like, it's a partnership where you every day have people at their workplace. They're giving a level of experience, a level of service. I think it's really, really fundamental in my head that people think that way around it as well.
I think it's also interesting if you're comparing a wafer-thin 3% margin with a margin of like NVIDIA as an example, and say, hey, is it not okay to earn 10%?
Exactly. And they'll be the first one to beat up their caterer, you can be sure.
So a shout out there to stop artificially lowering those prices for anyone in the business development game as we go into next year. But with 2025 in the rearview mirror, a year of sharper expectations, tighter economics, perhaps faster change in some areas than we had expected. Let's pivot to looking at what that sets up for 2026. What's going to be hype, and what should operators and clients be prepared for? Our first theme is really looking at those external factors. What do we think will be those external forces that really define the sector and how clients and operators make their choices as we go into the next year? Starting perhaps with you, Chris.
So external forces, we all know here in the UK, our cost base is shooting up, particularly for labour. It's absolutely killing our industry, as we know. Luckily, food at work, I wouldn't say it's immune to it, but it's at the end of the day, caterers are catering other people's premises with other people's money. Most of their clients are probably well off enough that they can afford to suck up that additional cost. That doesn't make it easy, but it means it doesn't kill the business, thank goodness. We're also seeing food cost inflation continues. It's not obviously nowhere near as bad as it was. So in terms of external influences, those are the bad ones. The good ones, we've already talked about tech. There's no question that in the coming year, access to AI and using it constructively is just going to motor on. But I think also looking at what the high streets are doing, as always, there's nothing new here, but actually reflecting what the high streets are doing it better. And it comes back to the point I made earlier. If you actually give people fabulous catering that's at least as good, if not better than the high street, we're seeing much greater usage of facilities. And as clients require their catering to form a core part of the workplace experience, then the good caterers out there will, I think, motor on and do very, very well this year.
Maybe down to you now, Peter.
I think I agree with what Chris said, but I think another trend that I think is really going to be accelerating even further in 2026 is health. I think what we see is that food at work or food at education, schools, etc. It's for the majority of people, it's the place that you eat the most outside of home, and that's a quite unique place and position to be in. I think as we see the younger generation starting to come up into the workforce and to the workplace to a higher degree, I think the focus on tracking your calories, tracking your nutrition, tracking your CO2 impact, maybe even integrating it with your other health apps so you can track your day-to-day on a larger scale, I think is going to be a trend that we will see a lot of, and at least something we will be investing quite a lot into, because at least we can see it on our own employees. I think especially the one maybe sub 30, I really, really care a lot about the nutritional intake and those things. And I think that's going to be an increasing trend in the year to come.
Simon, over to you. What trends do you think operators shouldn't be ignoring as we go into the next year?
So Chris mentioned sustainability and ESG earlier. Peter just mentioned about health and wellness and healthy eating and nutrition, etc. I think both of those combined with other things as well, like I raised about entertainment, for example. The expectations are increasing in all of those areas and more as the workforce or university or college or wherever we're working with clients. Consumer expectations are rising, as our own employee expectations are rising. And it's not a new thing at all, but I think those organizations that focus on CX and EX matters and improvement and engagement and retention will be the ones that succeed longer term. And as I said, that's not new, but I think it's rising in its importance every year as we move forward.
Do you think, guys, that we have a skills or an expertise gap here? We've talked about technology, we've talked about entertainment and experience, we've talked about nutrition and health tracking. If I'm a caterer sat here kind of planning my strategy for next year, do you think I have the expertise internally to take on and succeed with some of these initiatives? Or should I be looking to suppliers or consultants? Like, where do you see this being owned at an operational level?
I was really interested to learn of one of the caterers getting a Camplar implant because they're using so much Camplar technology that it just made sense to have someone full-time in there. But doesn't that make a lot of sense? Make sure you've got someone. It doesn't have to be the person who's part of the organization you're buying tech from. Whoever it is, someone who really gets it. I think our industry is really good at training. So whether it's doing that, getting people in from outside, or, we love an academy, don't we, in the catering industry? So we've had chefs academies, all of those things, coffee academies. I think Tech Academy is going to be next, isn't it? Because it's become so important. I've been really pleased, actually, when I've met, catering managers, not particularly chef managers, because I think they've got a really tough job, but people who are catering managers, they seem to just embrace it. I think that's thanks very much to the companies they work for, introducing it effectively and training them effectively so they see the value.
I also think that, like, fundamentally, the role of food in the workplace and also in education, for that matter, is changing. And I think also that catering companies have a important job in adapting their organization and skill sets to that. I think it's becoming, like, in 5-10 years ago, it was a lot about providing the food, like the cooking at an affordable rate, etc. But now it becomes a lot more about experience. And I think that's important that you also in your senior management get more and more people that also kind of can contribute to ideas and innovation and the next steps of that. So it doesn't just become the traditional operators, but you also get maybe some from outside of the industry that have worked with experience in other industries or elements. And I think, of course, tech is a part of what creating the experience, but I think it's just as much your concept development, how you engage the people, how I feel like there's so much potential in doing more of that. And I think it starts from, of course, you can have individual people that are really great on a contract level that makes it happen on individual contracts, and that's great. But I think for you to deploy it at scale across many locations, I think you really need to be really, really strong in your concept development and your experience development from the headquarters. And I think I can see some are investing in it and some are developing in it, but I think there's even more to do there in the future to really make sure that you are ready for the next generation of companies and what they are experiencing and what they are expecting from the caterer.
And Simon, I guess you typically know the US market with great depth, and a market which is typically seen as being ahead of the curve on a lot of these things. Do you think the companies that you work with in the States are ready for 2026 in terms of creating these immersive experiences with technology, with health tracking as well?
I think that some do it better than others, and some want it more than others, of course, and that varies by not only company but also sector as well. I was going to go back to what Peter was saying there, that I mentioned earlier about CX, but the employee experience, our own employee experience is really, really important too, right? And you asked about is there a skills gap? And as an industry, we've been very good for many, many decades about bringing entry-level folks on. And in many cases, I'm sure you could name many examples of people who've actually become the CEO or the managing director or whatever it is in senior positions. So there is the career growth in the industry, which is very encouraging, of course, to attracting the right people. We're not in the restaurant industry generally, so that we're not working till 11 or midnight every night, 7 days a week, which is another attraction. And to Chris's point about training, therefore, we're pretty good at training in academies, and we should double down on that so we can make sure that we do attract and retain the right level of talent to be able to deliver on the client promises that we make, right? But specifically in the US, there's one fly in the ointment, and that is around the tipping culture that exists across America. If you go and work in Starbucks, for example, on the high street, you're going to get part of your income from tips. If you work in a coffee shop in a business and industry site, it doesn't happen very, very often at all, but the likelihood is you're not going to get tips. So that's a big issue that we need to address in the States to be able to attract and compete with the Starbucks on the high street to get the right talent to work.
Perfect. And then potentially onto our last topic, but really the juicy end of the segment. We're going to talk about your predictions for 2026. So I'd like from each of you, if I may, if you could give one piece of advice to an operator planning their 2026 strategy, or a client for that matter, what would it be and why? Starting maybe with you, Peter.
I think it's a super interesting one because there's so many many moving parts. But for me, it would really be about investing into experiences and people. And I think attracting the right people is the core of our industry, and I think what we really need to also be increasingly aware of and focus on. But in addition to that, I think it's the experience, where I think there is so much more we can do from both a tech and concept perspective to help boost the actual really great food that is being cooked in many places. I, for instance, think that app is going to get a whole new narrative around it in the year to come. I think apps in country catering kind of started during COVID as something where you could pre-order something because suddenly we could not have people in the restaurants anymore. And I think it has kind of, to some degree, stuck a little bit with that narrative. And I think 2026 is going to be the year where we see huge impact of experience apps, but also physical experience creation from the caterers.
So focusing on experiences from Peter. Chris, your one piece of advice to that operator or client planning their strategy for next year?
Probably no surprise based on what I've been saying. I think there's two pieces of advice, really. I think the first thing is continue to do an amazing job with food. So drive those sales, drive that top line by giving people what they want and upselling wherever you can, and underpin that with really effective tech, because that is aiding efficiency. It's actually improving the customer experience, and it's aiding efficiency and therefore helping the bottom line. And I suppose we shouldn't really leave out ESG. Don't ever forget that, because that, for every client, catering is one of those areas where it's highly visible. So you can really support clients with that. And it's another area that can really appeal to customers and help drive those sales.
And finally, over to you, Simon, for your predictions and recommendations for next year.
I'll go back to the beginning of the call. Fully embrace AI to turn the mountains of data that you have, put the right level of resources, whether that be embedded resources or dedicated resources, to turn that mountain of data into insights that you can make decisions upon that will improve the employee experience, the customer experience, the food experience, the profitability, the efficiency. It may sound like that's really obvious, but taking that leap of making that full investment and fully embracing the opportunities of how AI could transform the business and the industry, frankly.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's absolutely possible, right? You see with the results posted by those that do succeed, the quality, as Chris mentioned, and the results from individual locations that get it right. It's about getting to the point where you know what to do and then kind of executing with great quality.
Quickly shoot up a little bit of a bold question. I don't think it's 2026, but what is your view on potential robots in this industry and how its potential is going to influence the future?
Robots?
Yeah.
Well, at the moment, they're a gimmick. right?
Yeah,
At the moment.
agreed.
There's ridiculous, but that's fine. That's okay. It introduces people. From what I can understand, I think robots, not the sort of robots that we see at the moment. You know, a robot going to serve people,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it will be a bit of fun. It's just a bit of fun. Not that, but I think actually more automated service and more automation behind the scenes. I think we'll probably see more of that. We're bound to, aren't we? It's almost inevitable. So maybe let's not refer to robots. Let's refer to automation.
Yeah. No, because I also think staff shortage, especially on the kitchen side, is a big issue for many caterers getting qualified people in there. And how can automation help in the kitchen is going to be an interesting theme. Maybe not 2026, but I think forward to 2030, I think we're going to see automation that can really help with that as well.
And we've worked with some robotic projects, kind of interesting, and everything from burger patty flipping in fast food restaurants to a fully blown burger bot that creates all the from the raw materials, creates a fully cooked, fully wrapped burger out to the other end. We've seen cobotics in terms of in the cleaning and janitorial industry. Obviously, there's the food delivery robots, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. And just yesterday on the news, there was a robot that kicked the CEO of the robotic company, apparently very successfully. So I think there's some automation efficiencies to be had through robotics. And especially if you think about the broader hospitality industry around reception, for example. I mean, robotics can be used for that. And, efficiencies back of house. It's going to be interesting to see where it goes for sure. But I wouldn't rule out robotics for the future.
What's interesting for me is if you look at maybe the last 5 to 7 years, the impact on the guest experience has been rather minimal. I would say outside of kind of Amazon Just Walk Out and the recent rise of AI self checkouts, the experience has more or less been the same. You go to a cashier or you order on an app, your website. But back of house, I think, is where the real revolution is happening, and where I think we're only just at the kind of tip of the iceberg as to what's possible. There is an element of chefs and operators being given a tool for everything. And I think what's going to be really interesting is seeing how they progress from having 20 different tools to having that kind of singularity platform where they can manage their entire operation from there. But maybe on that note, given the amount of time that we have left, we can bring it to a close. I'd like to thank you all for your insights. This conversation closes out 2025 as well. So hopefully leaving everyone listening with a clear idea of kind of where we've been and what the key themes would be, and also what is going to come next in the year ahead.